Hi, everybody. Welcome to Eat, Play, Love Holiday Edition. I am Rachel Atkins, Director of Strategy with Obesity Matters. Obesity Matters is a nonprofit organization for people living with elevated weight and obesity. It was formed by patient advocates whose focus is to provide evidence-based education and advocate for public policy and environmental changes that enable well-being. If we can do that, we are one step closer to the acceptance and inclusion of millions of people living in larger bodies. The Eat, Play, Love Holiday Edition runs weekly interactive events with experts and patient advocates. The first half of the episode is the interview, and then we turn the spotlight over to you, the audience, to address questions and comments in a safe and supportive environment. This season, we're focused on reframing how you celebrate the holidays and approach it with positivity. We are adding a holiday theme to each episode, and I'm going to scan the screen now to see what everyone's favorite color was. I see, actually, I was looking earlier and it's really a mishmash of things. Myself, I've chosen sort of like a deep jewel tone, crushed velvet, because I think that's so fun for the holiday season. But it's so exciting because we don't discriminate when it comes to color, clearly within this group. There's so many beautiful colors. And Judy, I'm just absolutely loving the orange and the beautiful necklace. So exciting. Thanks everyone for being so festive. Today, our special guest is Dr. Judy Shiau. She's the medical director and lead physician of the Leaf Weight Management Clinic in Ottawa. Welcome, Judy. We're so excited that you're here. And thank you for offering your time today. Before we dive into the questions, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself? And also, how did you end up in the space of obesity medicine?
Thanks so much. I am a general internist by training and moved to Ottawa in about 20 years ago, actually. And originally started working with a cardiology group and was their first female physician in a group of male dominant cardiologists. And my role was to be the specialist to help with cardiovascular risk factor management, diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, those nitty gritty things. And within about 6 months of working there, I realized a lot of this can be weight related, right? And so I actually remember that one moment in my life that changed everything. And it was talking to the director of that group. And I asked him, where do you send your people to help with weight? And his actual answer was, nowhere. Do you want to start something? And that was the birth of my bariatric medicine career. Like, we all have this, right? These aha moments in our life. And that one moment when I was talking to him literally in a closet, because he was sitting in a closet reading electrocardiograms, that changed my life. And from there, I started doing bariatric medicine and started working as a dietitian, doing one-on-one program interventions. Eventually, after 10 years or so, I moved on to the Ottawa Hospital. And that's where I met Dr. Dent, who is a colleague and a mentor, and essentially got exposed to even more treatment tool options for weight, including intensive medical programs involving meal replacements, bariatric surgery, medications, also another portion of it. But really, in the end, it's that counseling that's the most important. And I've grown over the years to have these great allied health working together. The big change was in 2016, where it became very clear that hospitals are awesome. They actually have great funded programs that can help the general population, but they're limited. And hospitals aren't really meant for chronic disease management. So in 2016, along with Dr. Dent and Danielle, Aldous, who's our lead dietitian, we opened up Leaf Weight Management Clinic in Ottawa. So it's a community clinic, multidisciplinary. We do training for fellows and residents. We do some research. We're there to try to pull it together, because there we can see people more long-term, as opposed to the hospitals where it usually is finite care and limited access. So that's kind of how I got here in a nutshell.
We're so glad that you had that aha moment, Judy, because we're very lucky to have you in this space. So I've seen for myself that, I've been able to follow a diet and lose the weight, but then very quickly following that diet, I actually find that I have to work harder because the weight just tends to come back on. I've done this so many times, over and over, in my history. So we're talking about the holidays right now. We're in the holidays, and that whole cycle I found is even much more difficult in the holiday season. What makes it so difficult to keep the weight off?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where, and I know this is not an unfamiliar concept to many of you because you've been to these talks before, but we now understand that weight management is complex and that our bodies naturally kind of try to defend that higher weight that we might have historically had. And that can be seen through hormonal changes, changes in our metabolism. And so in that spectrum, it's natural to have hunger signals and craving signals and so on. And I would say when you layer on a pandemic where we've all been social isolating for quite a bit, and then you add on, yay, it's holidays, I'm going to see people. I'm going to see people I haven't seen in a while. And then, of course, the natural kind of plethora of advertising and foods that are out there, we're susceptible, right? We're naturally susceptible, especially if you've been working hard at weight management, trying to be consistent with behaviors, consistent with a lifestyle, whether it's a change in nutrition or activity or sleep or stress. And then suddenly you have this that shows up. But you know what? In another portion of that is that it's good that it's happening, right? It's good that we're seeing people again. We are naturally, as human beings, we need to socialize. Look at this. This is socialization, right? We need that. And so we need to embrace that too, and make room for the discomfort that can occur, right? And enjoy that moment, be present for that moment, but then go back to what was working, right? That's the trick I find. I think many a times our minds can be really hard on us and say, I cheated. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. But no, I mean, enjoy that moment, be present in it, and then the next day, get back into the routine that was working for you. And that's not necessarily easy, and it takes practice. Okay? And the more you practice it, the more it becomes just a little bit easier each time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that whole idea of not beating yourself up. I mean, sometimes I feel like, that can be even harder depending on what your story might be. And, I'm sure like most of your clients, I have my own story as well. So I'm curious, how do you manage the plethora of patient stories that you hear and decide what might be the best treatment for that person because of their story?
Yeah, yeah. So, and this is how I train also our fellows and our residents. And when we talk to primary care providers too about just trying to sort out what makes sense for an individual, because you're exactly right. Everybody has their own journey. And I think without getting too medical, it's really listening. We have to listen, like doctors, primary care providers, nurse practitioners, we have to learn to listen really, really well. But to speak to just the nitty gritty, it always is kind of systematically done in my mind when we do a consultation with a new patient. So let's just talk about a new patient. So it's the typical, let's see what your medications are, your past medical history, your past surgical history, past psychiatric history, okay? Is there any history of eating disorders? Are you on medications that could be a barrier towards weight management? Are you on insulin? Are you on certain antipsychotic medications that can be weight gain predisposing? And it's good if you are and it's helping you, but let's see what we can do to mitigate that if possible. And then the fun part I like is learning more about your life. I want to know what happens to you on a day-to-day basis. I want to know what's happened to you in the past. What's your living situation, your social circumstances? Do you have insurance or not? Because I think in terms of our treatment options for the population, we have to make some economic sense out of it. And if you have an insurance plan that has coverage for allied health, medications, great. Let's see if we can access that. I like asking people about their hobbies. I like asking them about their relationships, because this is us getting to know what's their support network and what interests you. Has your weight actually been a barrier towards doing a hobby that you really, really enjoy? Or is it something that we can access now as an alternative to food, right? Someone who really enjoys artwork, but hasn't done it in a while. And at nighttime, those cravings, or I've got to do something, and look at those chips here, or whatever. It's normal. But can we now change that to something else that you love and enjoy? And maybe it's going to be artwork. Maybe it's a crossword puzzle. I don't know. But these are the things I would like to know about you. Another component of history taking is the family history. Okay. And we definitely know that genetics plays a huge role in weight. And it's not uncommon where you might say, hey, I'm the same size and shape as my parent, at the same age. That's genetics. And when you're beating yourself up and saying to yourself, damn it, I did it wrong again. What's wrong with me? Well, you know what? You've got a genetic predisposition towards weight. You probably store immensely well, which is awesome if we were a starvation nation. But we're not, right? And so we need to be a little bit forgiving to ourselves. And clinicians have to understand how hard it is that you're working at it when there's a genetic predisposition towards weight. So family history is really important. And then we go into your 24-hour day, right? Because it's not just about the waking hours, right? It's also about the sleep. Right? Are you getting enough sleep? Because if you're not, you're more vulnerable. You're more vulnerable to those cues that occur in our environment. Okay? And we need you to have good quality sleep. So maybe you have undiagnosed sleep apnea, right? And if you have that, then let's initiate for you to get a sleep study, or have your primary care provider do a sleep study. See if you could get something like a CPAP mask to help you breathe at night and get that oxygen to your brain. Stress, right? Stress, huge factor in our ability to manage weight. I mean, we know in itself, it creates this hormone, the cortisol, and that in itself can be weight gaining or harder to manage weight. But emotionally, right? Emotionally, stress, the anxiety, all of us have lived through it in the pandemic. I don't know a single person that just said, hey, it's a stressful time. And that can really play with our ability to just move forward, use our executive brain to just kind of say, hey, let's make a plan. You get panicked, right? So how do we ground ourselves? So stress is another one. Your pattern of eating. So, there is a history of eating disorders for a fair amount of people. Anorexia, bulimia is one of them. Binge eating is another category. And that's when you've got uncontrolled eating patterns, eat till you're full and it might hurt, you might feel guilty, you might hide the fact that you do that. There can be help, and that could be counseling support. Okay? So that's the kind of general gist. The other thing that I love to know about you when you're managing your weight is what has worked in the past, what hasn't, right? How has your weight changed over the years? Did you do Weight Watchers? Did you do high protein? Did you do a meal replacement program at the hospitals that are, funded? Yeah, there's all these different things that people have done. What has worked and what hasn't? And if we can tap into what has worked before and leverage that, then maybe we can also finesse and decide on what are other alternative treatment options or other things that we can do to help you move along.
Oh, that's so good and thorough. And I would be so curious to know for our audience, has any doctor ever asked you what your hobbies are? That's such a good question, Judy. So, part of the upcoming holidays is January 1st, and we all know what happens on January 1st. So we're going to start to see people making New Year's resolutions. I'm going on a diet, I'm going to lose weight. And then unfortunately they fail. And by fail, what I mean is that, their original intention is to lose a certain amount of weight, and maybe they do achieve that, but then it comes back on. So there's that feeling of failure. Why is that? Why do we go through this cycle over and over again?
Yeah, I think, that whole fresh year concept is very romantic to many of us, right? It's like, yes, new page, new chapter, gonna start fresh. Here we go. That's the momentum. I've got that energy burst. Let's go for it. Okay. And that just fuels us for oh so long, right? Because a week later, it's no longer New Year. We're into mid-January and then we're February. It's just that glamour of it dissipates. So sure, it could be a nice way to kind of kickstart, but is it going to drive us to continue whatever change it was that we wanted to commit to, right? And that's where you kind of have to tap into a little bit deeper of why am I going to do this, right? What is it going to do that will change my life? And how is that going to keep me going in this health behavior that I decided to commit on? And so it boils down to values. Maybe I'm going to be doing it because I have a sense of adventure and I want to travel and I want to have that mobility. So I'm thinking more ahead now. I'm not just thinking it's a fresh year. I'm thinking it is, I'm going to go to Italy. I'm going to climb those mountains. I'm going to go on, and so I need to be at a healthier weight for myself. And then I will have less knee pain, right? And this will continue to help motivate me to keep on with that health behavior. So for those of you who kind of get hard on yourself after New Year's and it's not quite working out, just kind of reflect back on why you did that from the beginning, right? And then the other thing is, let's be kind to ourselves. Let's normalize this. It is really normal to have a difficult time continuing health behavior. So don't, our brains can be super hard on us. It'll be just like you just said, it'll be like, I failed, etc. Thank you, brain. I hear ya. You're not being the kind, compassionate friend that I need right now. I'm just going to self-reflect a little bit about my situation and what works for me and why I want to do this. What is it that's going to continue to motivate me to move forward?
So good. So many tips in there. Great tips, Judy. In terms of the diets that people do take on for that, fresh new start, some people really swear by these diets. So, it could be keto or intermittent fasting or time restricted eating or low carb, paleo, whatever, might be hot for the moment. And like you said, maybe it's part of their history. They tap into the fact that something about that works for them. But do these diets actually really work in sustaining the weight loss?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the good news is that all diets work. Yeah, they do. They do. Because really, honestly, you just said it, right? People will lose weight, right? They work. The question is, how do you continue it? Okay. And so, sometimes any of those dietary or nutritional changes that a person, as long as it's healthy, I think those that are kind of very low protein, or if it's really kind of a starvation thing, there's that famous cabbage soup diet that occurred at one point, and all you're having is cabbage soup. And honestly, that to me, that's not nutrition. But let's say you're doing something like time restricted feeding or Weight Watchers or whatever it is. Great, let's run with it. And then what is it that you mean that it's not working for you anymore? So here's the thing. So some people say it's not working for me anymore because I'm not losing weight anymore. And then I'm just holding my weight stable. But that's actually a win, right? That's actually a win. And that means you're actually doing well. And no diet will get you to a weight of 0. We wouldn't want that anyways, because that would be kind of deadly. So, but if you lose some weight and you're holding it off and your weight is stable, you haven't failed. You've actually done tremendously well for yourself. The other thing that we bariatric clinicians are trying to do is kind of get away from that number on the scale, right? So think about the non-scale wins. With that weight that changed with whatever dietary intervention that I did, what other differences have I noticed? Do I have more energy? I'm sleeping better? I have less pain? Those are tremendous wins. So always reflect, okay? Because the natural instinct to say that scale isn't budging, damn it, I failed. No, that's the brain being mean again, right? You actually have to think, what have I gained through this process? And it is still working for me, and it is. Is this sustainable? This is great. I can continue it. Right? Now, let's say you're hoping for a little bit more weight loss and you're looking at, what other changes can occur. And maybe there is. Maybe it is going to be a switch in the macronutrient profile. Maybe it is going to be a different diet. Maybe it's going to be adding more activity. Maybe it's better sleep. Okay. That's the time where it might be helpful to talk to your healthcare provider. Okay? And it doesn't have to be a doctor, right? It could be a dietitian, right? Right. And these are the things where you can finesse and see, does it make sense for me to make any more changes? Or can I just continue what I'm doing? Because I'm actually doing a pretty good darn job.
I think you've really helped us understand that, even some of the questions that you're asking right now, some of us, we already know a lot of that, but it's the reminder to ask yourself those questions. And it makes me curious about, the program that you offer at the Leaf Clinic. Do you have some kind of support program? How do you find that helps people in their journey? And, maybe another thing you can touch on, I know we're talking specifically about your clinic, which is in Ottawa, but we get a lot of questions from our audience because we're from all over Canada, some people outside of Canada. How do folks that are maybe not in Ontario tap into something like what you're offering?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as I talked about my journey, right, from the hospital to this medical clinic. So I think in Ontario, so let me just focus first on what Ontario offers, right? And actually any province offers physician care as coverage, right? That's part of healthcare. So that's always free, right? But then to work with an allied health professional, a dietitian, there's a cost, right? We've all experienced that. Even to see a psychologist, kinesiologist, any of that, there's a cost. And sometimes people have medical insurance plans to help cover that. So that's terrific. In Ontario, we're lucky enough that the Ministry of Health funds medical programs at the Ottawa Hospital, which involves intensive lifestyle interventions, a 6-month program, and a meal replacement that's used to help kind of break the cycle people are in and bring their weight down. And it's free to program. You still have to buy your shakes, but the program is free. At Leaf, we run that same program. Okay? But you have to pay for the program. That's the unfortunate thing. But it costs to run a quality program. So with the pandemic, we've switched everything to virtual, which is wonderful. So actually, from an Ontario perspective, when you have a physician involvement, physicians can really only see, as I'm licensed to see people in Ontario, and hence I can see anybody in Ontario virtually right now, which is lovely. So anytime somebody is involved in a physician-based coordinated care with a program, then they have to be within Ontario. Now, what we've done is we've grown our dietitian-based services. These are dietitian-based services, and this you can't get at the hospital. So that's why I'm talking about my clinic for now. But at our clinic, our dietitians are now leading programs so that people within other provinces could technically, basically join that if they wanted to. Okay? And so specific provinces, I have to tell you, because it depends on the dietitian's license. Right now, we're limited to Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland. So if they want to work one-on-one or in a group with a dietitian, they absolutely can. And so that's our website's about to be kind of updated. So that'll be a little bit more obvious in the next few weeks. Group support, tremendously important. Okay? So we definitely have that. We actually launched a couple of things during the pandemic. One was we noticed a lot of people, okay, to be fair, there were some people who didn't struggle as much. In fact, it was wonderful to be in a pandemic. Suddenly they had more hours in the day, they didn't have to travel, more home cooking. That worked for them. That's awesome. And then others really struggled, okay, for various reasons that, some of that can be pretty obvious with the stressors that occur with the pandemic, even financially. So we launched a program called Belief, which is a 4-part sessions, free to the general public. Again, you have to be an Ontario resident because basically it was our whole HIP buildings that paid for it. But it's been wonderful. It was really focused on that behavior. So that was one group support. Another one that we have is called Pods, and essentially that runs once a month. It's for people who've done programs with us, and we've got a regular turnout now, like 40, 50 people every month. It's wonderful. This December 14th, if anyone has interest, our dietitian is holding a webinar at 7 p.m. and it's about holiday eating. okay, strategies. And you can sign on just like you do for Obesity Matters. And that will be, the posting is on our Facebook or our Instagram, or if you sign on to our newsletter, which if you get monthly, you'll get an update on that and you can sign on to the link. So we're trying. We're really, really trying.
Oh, that sounds great. And we'll make sure that we get that information out to the audience as well. You touched on the psychology and the role of psychology. Can you share a little bit more about why that's so important when it comes to, avoiding those plateaus and managing through weight gain?
Yeah. I think the psychology pillar, so many of you might have heard how Obesity Canada, the obesity guidelines have really kind of focused on this house model for management of weight. So the roof of the house or the post is lifestyle, diet, and exercise. Okay? And then you have that behavioral support pillar, and then a medication support pillar, and then you have the surgical support pillar. And I would say that behavioral support pillar is one of the most important ones, because even things like taking a medication is a behavior, right? And so the question is, when you have weight regain, is again to fall back into the behaviors that worked before. Okay? And I already hinted about the fact that our brains can be naturally hard on ourselves, right? And it's kind of to distance yourself from those thoughts, right? You can't abolish it, right? You can't, those thoughts keep on showing up, and people might say, oh, change your thoughts. You're not like that. But your brain will just come back even louder, saying, oh, yes, I am. I'm a loser. And so it's to distance yourself. So, just looking at some of the psychological tools that you can do is to distance by noticing it. Yeah, I notice that thought that shows up. And gosh, now I'm noticing that I'm noticing that thought. And I'm distancing myself from that thought. So it has less power, less grab on me. Another way to do that, when your brains can be really, really hard on ourselves, is to name that story. Oh, what can I name this story? Oh, it's the beat myself up story. Oh, there it is again, that beat myself up story. Oh, look, I'm noticing the beat myself up story, right? And it has less power. So it's a matter of kind of detaching from our own brain, accepting that those thoughts occur, but distancing ourselves. So that's an example of how that psychological component can be so important. So rather than giving up and saying, yeah, brain, I'm a loser, I'm just going to go back to whatever. No, you're like, thank you, brain. I'm distancing myself. I am now going towards that action behavior that I know that I had planned for New Year's. And I know I want to commit to because my value is adventure and I want to travel. And that's going to keep me going.
I love it. I have just named my beat myself up story.
Oh, you can name it really like some bad names, but I can't say that on the video.
So Judy, one more question before I ask you my final question. I've often heard you talk about the 4 C's of weight management. Can you please explain this concept to our audience so they can be aware and address it with their health care provider if that's possible for them?
Yeah, so this is interesting because the 4 C's, and I put that out there on another webinar a while back. It's something I came up with, and I'm actually writing a book on it. So it hopefully in the next few months that will come out. But the general gist of it is the following. Okay, for clinicians, just to give you a sense, we've been advocating something called the 5 A's. So it's just a step-by-step process that clinicians can talk to a person who's living with obesity to just bridge that gap, right? But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, but what about the individual who's living it? Can't they do something now? And so the 4 C's is something that I think is just a simple concept that a person can work with. And the first C is really that compassion. Okay, compassion to yourself. For goodness sake, you work hard at it. Okay, I don't know anybody who hasn't worked hard at weight management in some form or the other, right? And there's always tweaks, and you haven't failed. And I've given you a spectrum of why it's difficult. And there's so much that we can control, right? So I would say the first step is that compassion to yourself. Okay? So the next step is really what's the change? So that's the second C. So what change am I going to commit to? And you know what? It could be lots. I would advise maybe let's start with something that's kind of that low hanging fruit, something that you can commit to, right? So that would be the third C. Let's commit to it, right? And see how it goes. Give it a little while. And you know what? Maybe it's not the right one. And that's okay. Let's get compassion. Because we tried. And if it didn't work for us, you didn't fail. It just wasn't the right fit. Let's think about that again in a compassionate manner. And then let's create another change and commit to that. Okay? And then the last C is to connect, right? Because we are meant to be with people. We are a society. I know there's some people who like to be loners and so on, but in the end, you know, when you connect with somebody or something, it could be it could be a pet, that walks with you, right, at lunchtime. It's helpful to continue that behavior. Okay? And that concept of connect can be a friend, it could be a neighbor, again, it could be a pet, and it can also be your clinician. Okay, because often enough, again, that gap in care is the discussion between the physician or clinician and the patient who's living that experience. And how do you start that conversation? So clinicians have the 5 A's that's used, okay? And then I'm thinking individuals can go through the 4 C's and use that connect to also discuss with their physician if there's any other alternatives to consider for weight management.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I have one final question. So if Obesity Matters had this huge giant billboard that was in town for everybody, and you could add one message to that, what would it be, Judy?
It'd be to be kind to yourself.
Oh,
Says it all.
So good. Oh my gosh, that was wonderful. There's so many great tidbits in there. And that concludes the interview part of our session today. But now we're going over to questions from you, from the audience. So we will alternate between live questions and ones in the chat box in order of relevance to our conversation here today. We encourage you, if you would like to ask a question, to turn on your camera when you're ready to ask the question, introduce yourself, and let us know where you're tuning in from. You can raise your hand virtually. There's a little icon on the bottom that allows you to raise your hand, and that will let me know to prompt you to ask your question. And, if that's difficult to find, please just, go crazy with waving your hand, and we'll try to keep an eye out in the different chat boxes to find you. So that's great. Over to questions. We'd love to hear what you have to ask about. And maybe to start, I know there's been lots going on in the chat box. Rosie, are you able to give us some ideas about what's going on there? Is there a question you'd like to start us off with?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. We do have a question related to the LEAF program. And the question is, I looked at the LEAF program and have the following question. On an occasion such as Christmas, would we be required to make one of the suggested recipes as shown in the samples? This individual is in Ottawa, by the way. So maybe you can describe how the recipes look.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, you're
okay.
never obligated to do specific things, right? I think what we have in general, the principle is to be give you flex. That's the point, right? To teach you that flexibility. Okay? So rigid thinking doesn't help, right? If you're all or none, well, it works for a little while, but then afterwards, it's very difficult to sustain. So we give guidance and kind of certain, ideas, but it doesn't mean you have to do that, right? Sometimes the question comes up. We have these programs where, like I said, you go on full meal replacements. And people are like, yeah, it's all about the shakes. Have to stay on the shakes. That's all I have to do. If I have, no. Okay, so we encourage people to have vegetables. You can actually suddenly develop a love with vegetables because, oh my gosh, I've been on these shakes for a while. Now I can crunch a celery stick and the texture, I would never even recognize this as a pleasure. And now I do. So our goal is to build people's ability and skill sets. That's the word, the skill sets to have that flexibility of changes in nutrition. And that's our point, right? To help you not feel rigid.
Thank you. I think Beverly may have waved her hand. If you have, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, we'll give you a couple minutes. If feel free to ask your question if you'd like. For now, maybe we'll go back to you, Rosie, in the chat box.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I hear someone. Did someone want to ask a question? Oh, maybe that's just feedback. We're getting some great comments.
Oh,
sorry, I was probably me. I'm Bonnie from Ottawa.
And hi, Bonnie. Sorry.
Hi, everybody. And I have to give great kudos to Dr. Shiau and Danielle, our dietitian. We started, well, my husband and I both started the program, but I continued on with the pods afterwards. And I have maintained over a year and a half and have just done my plateauing, and I'm going down again. And the part I love the most is the clothes. I love going shopping, and I like getting in touch with Dr. Shiau once a month and doing the pod sessions. Danielle does meals. She used to do them in-house, and now she does them online, and she's got great recipes, and tons of people attend this anymore. Even though I miss a bit of the in-house because we got to taste, it's still wonderful. It's still lovely. And I can't recommend this program enough. It should be Canada-wide. It's just been an amazing turnaround for me.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for sharing, Bonnie. That sounds amazing. And I would also like to be in-house to taste these things that you're making. Over to you, Rosie, in the chat box.
Great, thank you. There's lots of great comments coming in on advice on how people are finding ways to get active that are making them happy. There's a comment about an individual walking her dog every day to get exercise, for example, and another comment about enjoying going shopping, rediscovering clothes that she loved that she hasn't worn for years, being motivating for her. So yeah, we're getting great feedback, and we also have a question about what program was just mentioned. So maybe we can just reiterate the information about the LEAF program, and there is public information available as well. I would think as well that people can use no matter what province they're in.
Yeah, so just to comment on the dog. So I've had patients because, you don't necessarily want to take care of a dog, but they'll walk their neighbor's dog, right? It's great. It's great. You can help your neighbor, you get the exercise, you don't have to take care of the dog other than the walk. I'm just throwing it out there. I thought it was terrific. Yeah, so in terms of the program, so when we're talking about meal replacement programs, okay, the intensive one that Bonnie, if you don't mind my sharing here, is that she's talking about, yeah, okay, perfect. It's the STREAM program. And that's the same one that's offered through Ontario in a funded fashion, okay, with limited access based on people's BMI criteria, and has about a year wait list right now, I think, okay, depending. So what we have is the same version, which I actually think is a little bit better, but it's run privately. So yeah, you have to pay for the cost of the program. And I wish it didn't have to be that way, but it is, because that's the only way we could financially do the program. Then we have our Root program, which, the basis of it is really working with the dietitian, and it's one-on-one with coordinated physician care. And if somebody wants, they can do what we call a partial meal replacement. So meaning they can replace 1 or 2 meals in a day with a meal replacement. And it doesn't have to be forever. It could just be at least an initial basis just to set that structure. And the question always is, well, why a meal replacement? I'll just say it just takes the guesswork out of things, right? So you have this nutritious meal that's a shake that has lower calorie and good quality content in terms of proteins and carb ratio, etc. And good. Now I know how to think about it. Now I've got more mental real estate to think about other things, including that lovely dinner I plan with my family, right? Or what snacks I'm going to have through the day, or how I'm going to add that walk in the day. So that's how it can help.
So good. Rosie, any more questions in the chat box?
Yes, thank you. We do have a question. The question is, what is your experience with the sugar flour addiction model? Have you seen it be successful in the long term?
So I think that's a very deep question in terms of the concept of food addictions, right? I think whenever anybody tells me that they feel addicted to sugar, addicted to fat, addicted to, oh gosh, I swear there's something about Pepsi. But anyways, addicted to Pepsi, I believe it, right? I believe it. I think the question is how to move forward on that. I always think it's the same kind of principle of, what is the change that makes sense for that individual. I do like to kind of steer away from the all or none type thing. But then for some people, it makes sense, like just staying away from those sugar products because any little bit of it is triggering. But you have to really get to know the person, right? And it boils back again to that kind of concept of let's try to change. Let's commit to it for a while. Let's see how it works for you. Didn't work? That's it. Let's try something else. Like not to give up and not to be hard on yourself.
Yeah, I love that. It's, not necessarily just kind of categorizing ourselves in one area and then thinking that there's one solution to that, because going back to our stories, they're so complex and there's a lot going on there. And so sometimes it's not a good thing to kind of pigeonhole ourselves in one way, because there's many things that could actually be of benefit and help us to better manage our weight.
Yeah.
Rosie, back to you. I think I did see another question or two pop up in the chat box.
Yes, thank you. It was a great comment about someone borrowing someone's dog, their neighbor borrowing their dog to take a walk. So thanks for sharing more of those examples with us. And we have a question regarding, do you track clinic results? If so, would you share these results?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question because we just recently, because I have fellows, right? I have doctors who are training who spend a year with us, hopefully to do their own bariatric practice. So one of our fellows looked at our STREAM program, and essentially we're getting that kind of 15 to 20% weight loss. But what we wanted to do is compare our in-person with virtual, right? Because that's what happened with the pandemic. And it's very interesting because virtual care actually did better, right? I know. I just saw some people's faces. Yeah, it did better. And I think, okay, so this is retrospective. So it's not the best type of studies are randomized, prospective, etc. So this is kind of looking at data backwards. But still, it's so interesting because I think virtual care allowed for, and probably the reason why virtual care did better was people who attended the sessions more. And, just to reflect on the latest snowstorm in Ottawa, that would have killed my clinic. Nobody would show up, right? Because only like the diehards that really wanted to be there would be there. But with virtual care, people show up. They show up to the meetings. They come to their appointments. And those touch points are so important. So yeah, so that's something that we've just looked at our data.
Wow, that's so very interesting. But I think you're right. It's the idea that maybe a lot of us being home, we haven't had a lot of structure to our day, as opposed to before the pandemic. So, going to those appointments can kind of add a little bit of that back into our lives. So it can be really helpful. And I'm really thinking about the whole dog thing now. I'm wondering if I should volunteer because I'm a cat person. I don't have a dog, but I do have a cat. And I'm wondering if I should be volunteering to take the neighbors' dogs for a walk. Rosie, back to you. I don't see any live questions. Apologies if I've missed anyone. Again, you can just raise your hand like this, or you can do so virtually if you wanted to ask a question.
There's one.
Great, thank you
There's
so
one
much.
from Bonnie. Sorry. Bonnie just raised her hand.
Unmute.
I walk my cat. I don't have a dog.
Oh,
So you can teach your cat to walk. Just get a harness and a leash and treat him with treats, and you can walk your cat. And that's what I do for exercise.
Beautiful.
oh my gosh, I love it. Okay, Jasper, be careful. You're gonna get a harness.
So here's an idea. and I'm not gonna name it specific, I'm gonna make it up a little bit, but the concept is the same because I don't want to identify the person. But this person has a hobby, and let's say it's jewelry making, right? And this person has now started a part-time job at a jewelry store, right? Because and that person was basically sitting in front of the computer screen all day because that's the person's job, right? But now they have this extra job with a little bit of extra income, and they have to stand, they have to walk, they're in a field that they love, right? So that's kind of a parallel. It's actually a different hobby and a different kind of thing. I just don't want to name the person or identify a person, but I just think it's neat. That's why I love knowing about people's hobbies.
I do love that question. I think that's so interesting to hear, like your doctor saying, what are your hobbies? And for very good reason, clearly. We see Corinne has raised her hand. Corinne, did you want to unmute yourself and tell us where you're tuning in from? And what's your question?
Thank you very much. I'm tuning in from Ottawa. Hi, Dr. Shiau. Anyway, I love the session. At this time of the year, I find I have a lot of personal challenges. One is not having enough daylight. And the second is the emotions associated with these holidays, both the joy and the sadness. And it's a struggle for me. I get all choked up. I could be in the grocery store and I'll hear something and then I'll just burst. I'll have a grief burst, it just burst into tears. And I know that about myself. Are you, Dr. Shiau, would you have any techniques or like, the top 3 to kind of at that moment bring myself back and say, okay, I'm a good person. I understand what I'm going through. This is, it's a challenge for me, but I can do it. Something like that. I can say those things to myself, but I'm just guessing that many other people have the same struggle or challenges at this time of the year. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and it's a complex question. I think number one is that you notice what's happening. Some people don't. They don't see the pattern. The other thing I hear from you is that you actually feel compassion for yourself because you recognize that you're vulnerable. There's darker hours, darker days, and there's a history there of things that have happened to you, right? I think in terms of a technique or something to just kind of anchor yourself, and I've experienced it myself, and it may not have been necessarily that kind of deep emotion, but it might have been anxiety, right? That anxiety, that stress. In the middle of a grocery store, same thing happens to me too, right? We call it dropping anchor. And so essentially it's a means of just kind of just pausing, coming to notice your own body, recognizing the tension is occurring, recognizing that, all the emotions, noticing it, and then looking out, right? Just taking a look and start looking at your environment and, look at the shadows along that corner. Or, I hear that music that's going around in the mall. Or I could notice that smell of whatever it is that's baking, right? It's just to become more present in where you're at, just so that, again, you can kind of distance yourself to whoever was hooking you, right? That was creating that whole tension, anxiety, and the tears and the emotions. As to one, recognize what happened, feel it in depth, and now look out and try to appreciate what is going around you and then move forward.
Thank you. Those are the techniques that I was looking for, something to get back into the moment and to, look around and be present. Thank you.
There's a great psychologist named Dr. Russ Harris, okay? And he has free videos, right? You should Google him, right? And there are these type of techniques that you can just look on YouTube. I didn't explain it as good as he does because he has a beautiful accent. Whenever you do it with an accent, it's so much better. But it just gives you a gist of it. But I think the other thing is to practice it, right? Practice it not when it's the worst time. Okay? Practice it when it's not too bad. You're just gonna practice it to learn to be present in the moment, right? And then when it really is that crashing time, then you're used to it, right? You've done it before, so you can just put that drop anchor into place.
Oh, sorry. I was practicing that right now. Such a good technique. Wonderful. Thank you for that great question. Rosie, over to you. Any other questions in the chat box?
There's been some great resources that the community has been providing. So thank you so much, including the local resources for BC for looking for healthcare practitioners and support. And thank you for the dog walking resources as well. That's fantastic. And there's someone put in a resource for the dropping anchor link as well. So the community is just amazing, on the ball, and very responsive. I do have a final question based on your presentation. And it's around what you were talking about with stress and how stress makes it difficult to use our executive brain. I was wondering if you could just touch on that executive brain concept a little bit more in terms of how do we tap into it, have that brain be in the moment so that we can empower ourselves for healthy weight management.
Yeah. So think of it this way, okay? We have a caveman brain, okay, that's programmed for survival, period, right? And it's always on, okay, right? There's a fire, we got to escape, we're going to run out there, you know, that's kind of caveman brain going into automatic pilot, right? And then our executive brain is what helps us make those changes in behavior. But that executive brain needs to be turned on, okay? And so it's not uncommon that you'll say, hey, it's a fresh morning, I made me breakfast, I planned my lunch, I'm gonna go out there and so on. But in the meantime, I've been on the computer, I've had to pick up the kids, I coordinated whatever gajillion other things. And that executive brain, by the end of the day, in the afternoon, is tired, it's uncharged, right? And so now that's what happens. That's why people have difficulty and they're more susceptible in that afternoon and evening. It's because they just want to go back to the caveman brain, relax, right? Put up my feet. Why should I go out for a walk? I'm tired. There's all these different thoughts that show up. So the question is, how do I charge that executive brain? It's just like if I have my cell phone, right? And I need to plug it in. Right? And I do that every night. I plug it in to make sure it's charged. So how do I plug it in for that afternoon? So the story of how you can plug it in and charge it varies per individual, right? And some of it might be, I'm just going to give you a few examples. Maybe you didn't eat all day, right? Some people are just like, I was so busy, I forgot to eat. Have you heard that before? I've heard it a lot, right? And you're not alone. It's just that you were really doing other things and weren't thinking for yourself, right? So what if I did eat during the day? That's good. Now I'm energized. Now I have charged my executive brain and I'm ready to continue. And I'm ready to be less susceptible to whatever food cues or visual cues that are occurring. Let's talk about cues. What the heck is that bag of potato chips or cookies doing on the counter, right? It's there, you can see it. Now, of course your brain's going, ooh, I came home. Ooh, I deserve a snack. Yeah, why not? Caveman brain comes on, executive brain's off. So put it away, right? Maybe it's a drawer for the others, right? Maybe it's not as visual. Maybe you buy the chips or the chip candy that you don't like for the rest of the family, so you're less tempted. I can't stand ketchup chips. Great, buy it for the rest of the family. Maybe they'll be happy with it. So then you're less tempted. So that would be another way of kind of like managing, when our executive brain is less charged during the end of the day. So those are just some examples.
Thank you so much, Judy. That concludes our session for today. We really appreciate you so generously giving of your time. I would say for myself, my biggest takeaway is there's so many wonderful things that you mentioned, but I really feel like underlying all of that, it's the idea to tap into our values and why are we doing this and what are the wonderful things that managing our weight actually brings into our life. So thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you to the audience for some amazing questions. If you'd like to get involved As a member of the Obesity Matters community, we will be sending out a survey and would really appreciate it if you would complete that survey so we can continue to build programs like this, programs that are recommended by you with topics that you're very interested in learning more about. So this concludes the Eat, Play, Love Holiday Edition. It has been a pleasure hosting you. We wish you a happy and safe holiday season. And also, one more thing to add, since several of you have requested a more interventional program, we are now introducing a 6-week nutrition workshop. It's called Eat Better, Live Better, and it starts on January 27th. We'll be posting more information about this program on our website, through social media, and through our newsletter and emails. So stay tuned for more information. Until I see you next time, I hope you have the most beautiful holiday season. Bye.